This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
The song will tell you what to do. And that was one of the bigger little quotes and lessons that sticks with me is just follow what the song is doing. There are certain things that even if the song was performed differently might work, but it's not working with the way this particular performance was or the way it was captured. You might not be able to do anything you want. And more often than not, you shouldn't. Just do what the song is telling you to do.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Adam Krinsky, a mixer engineer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He owns and runs a studio in St. Paul, Minnesota called Bellows. I guess I should clarify that Minneapolis and St. Paul are considered the Twin Cities. They're right next to each other. In Adam's 15 years of music, he has been a producer, engineer, mixer, front of house mixer, tour manager, and educator. That's a lot of hats, man. Adam's career started after graduating from the Institute of Production and Recording in Minneapolis. He was hired by the owner and co-founder Tom Tucker as his assistant engineer at Master Mix Studios. In parallel to working in a big fancy studio, he was also moonlighting in a small punk rock basement studio called Vaudeville, $1 million studio during the day and a Mackie and SM57s at night. Adam started working at a local guitar shop called Twin Town Guitars, which is where he met many of the local musicians. And in 2006, he recorded and mixed an album called A Detail of Soldiers by the Alarmists, which received local recognition, and since then, he's never been without a project to mix. Over the years, Adam has worked on albums for artists like Bo Ramsey, Mason Jennings, The Pines, Kill the Vultures, Sadistik, and Peter Wolf Crier, to name just a few. These artists range in genres from blues and folk to hip-hop and indie rock, so a wide genre of music. Somewhere along the way, he was also asked to go on the road And reluctantly, as he says, he eventually tried it out and found a second passion in touring. Since then, he's mixed front of house for artists like Iris DeMent, Mason Jennings, Harmar Superstar, Marijuana Death Squads, The Pines, and Trampled by Turtles, to name just a few. I'll have to ask you if you did the Trampled by Turtles show at Bonnaroo back in a few years back. He is also taught at a few recording schools and was a field mixer for the 6th season of Jersey Shore. These days, Adam is either mixing in a studio or he's on tour with Trampled by Turtles. I think I just found out my answer, Adam. Thanks so much to Evan Bakke for making our introduction. Please welcome Adam Krinsky to Recording Studio Rockstars. Adam, are you ready to rock, dude?
Let's do it.
Dude, great to have you here on the show, man. So let's start with that. Were you mixing front of house for Trampled by Turtles when I would have seen you guys down at Bonnaroo Festival?
Yes, I was.
Awesome. So that show, as I recall, is a lot of acoustic. It's like acoustic instruments, but with a power, intention, like an edge, right? So you want to be kind of loud and proud, but it's kind of the lineup of what might be a bluegrass band, right?
Yeah, I went into that gig with one idea of what I thought I would want to do with that show, and then quickly found out it wants to be a different animal. When they brought me on, the beginning of it is you kind of sit sidecar next to their current person so you can get a sense of it. It's just kind of a nice way to transition into a larger gig like that.
Yeah, don't you wish we could all produce records that way too and mix them that way in the studio?
Oh, wouldn't it be great to see what they're doing? So you're like, oh, I can just easily just up that one thing and I'm better.
Yeah.
It was intimidating because I was like, wow, this show is big and loud and there's a lot of sub bass and they're kind of shredding, and like you listen to a bluegrass record or even their bluegrass records doesn't sound like that. So I was like, oh, well, I can see the first thing I want to change is I want to get in here and make this more of a bluegrass band and a bluegrass show. And that was kind of where I had thought I was going to make a big difference, or at least, they weren't bringing me in because they had a problem. Their person was leaving and going on to a different part in their life. So I was like, oh, cool. This is what I would do with it. This is how I feel like I want to go about this show. And then I did some of those and got that show feeling that way. And it really did not work for that band.
Interesting.
They're a headliner. They have a show. There's a production aspect to it. And they need to be bigger than maybe a more traditional bluegrass guys around a microphone type thing. So I still was adamant that that's what I thought would be cooler, darken the sounds, warm up the tones. It's 6 stringed instruments, mandolin, fiddle, banjo, acoustic guitar, acoustic bass, and cello. And I was like, this is a lot of strings. That's a lot of strings coming at you. Right. And sometimes they're playing fast and hard. And I was like, I need to warm this stuff. The last show, I thought it was bright and kind of harsh. And I was like, it's just thundering at you. So I tried to warm it up. I was low passing, clearing out high end for vocals and just making space for stuff. And then was going to keep it kind of more natural sounding. And they have a drinking crowd, a party crowd, people who are out there to have fun.
Right.
And they did not care for my inside mix. You know what I mean? They did not get as excited as I saw them previously with their other mixer, just going crazy, just going ape shit, And so I was like, okay, I gotta change something here because it's just not clicking. And, the nice thing about modern day touring is the band will never hear this. You know what I mean? They're all on in-ears. They'll never see their show. They don't care. They trust you. So, and they were very cool. They were like, we don't care what you do, just have fun.
Right. Let me just put a shout out to whoever's driving the bus for Trampled by Turtles right now. If you are near the stereo, go ahead and change the station in the middle of the podcast. They don't actually hear this episode, right?
Much appreciated. Yeah, right. No, I mean, I talk with those guys about it all the time, and they don't care. And they've come during sound check because I do virtual playback when I'm tuning, so they can, if they want to, hear the show. Usually they run out of the room before anyone can can hear a note because they don't want to hear it,
Right, right. And they've let you know at this point, they're like, listen, man, if you mess with our mix, we know where you live. Remember that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they do. What I quickly found out is I need to kind of make this a burner the way it was kind of presented when I first saw it. And over the 2 years that I've been doing it now with these guys, the show just continually gets a little more aggressive, a little bit bigger. And so by the time you saw it at Bonnaroo, I think Matt was maybe 6 months in or so to working with those guys. And at that point in time, I was already shredding, and it was a big, loud show. And that was such a thrilling venue. I mean, main stage at Bonnaroo, that is a huge, huge, huge stage.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, there's so many speakers. This is insane. Like you can't overpower that PA. You just can't. So it was a fun stage to mix. But I was finding problems with my reverb at the Bonnaroo show. And then I figured it out. It's because it's in a giant tin building of a stage. And that thing
you probably
has
had
so
a
much
rooftop on it. I think that was one of the, was that a stage that had the tent covering, or was that the main stage that had the, just the big open field in front of it?
It was the main stage. And so, I mean, it wasn't a tent, but though it had like a structure of tin, literally. Like, I think it was like a metal building almost.
Yeah.
It's obviously because they got to protect that stage and whatnot, but it was so ambient. Any sound going through that PA had a long decay from the stage. And that was like, I was wondering why everybody was kind of in a plate reverb all night. And that's why. It's just a giant plate reverb of a stage. But it sounds good. And it was so big that it's not really a problem.
So that's fascinating to me, the whole idea of doing the front of house and doing the studio stuff. For me personally, I loved doing a little bit of front of house because there was a liveness and an energy to the moment that was made it fun. But I didn't love it because it was just too out of control for me and my ears, and wanting to listen at a more controlled volume. But the way you're describing it, it's pretty cool being in these huge PAs and stuff. What are some thoughts about that? What are the things that you really love about going from the studio to front of house? And then where are the challenges that people are going to run into, or you got any helpful advice about it?
Sure. Well, there's a lot to it. So in the beginning, I was just concerned that if I started doing live sound of any kind, the stigma of, well, then you're not a studio guy, or like your studio chops aren't there. You know what I mean?
That's now it's on a podcast, so you're screwed, man.
Now I'm really screwed. Everyone who wants to find this podcast will never hire me again in the studio. That was my concern. And luckily I had a cool example. And there's a guy in town here. His name is Tom Herbers, and he's awesome. And he actually was with Trampled by Turtles at some period of time in the past, but I knew him as a studio guy first. And I thought he was a great studio guy. He's really smart, classic studio rat. So he knows his gear. Like, he's into gear, and he's into modifying and fixing tape machines, and he's on it. And he's done a bunch of great records, and he would tour and do front of house, and nobody thought lesser of him because of that. So he was my example that you can do both and not be written off in the studio world if you tour. So that was like, all right, well, if Tom can do it, maybe I could do it. And he was good at both. And he mainly tours with a band called Low, which is amazing. So I was like, okay, he's working with a really cool band. He's doing really cool records. There's a way to do this. So that was kind of how I was willing to try it. And it is intimidating for sure. And the adrenaline and just the general nature of you're absolutely in the hot seat when it's going bad, and no one cares about you when it's going good.
Right.
You know what about you, which is what you're hoping for.
Yeah.
That took a little while to get used to, that adrenaline. But once you kind of have some good shows, you start to get the bug, hopefully.
It's like if the crowd is rushing towards the stage, you're doing great. If the crowd is rushing towards the sound booth, you're in trouble.
There's your sign. So that was kind of where it started. Then it was learning how to mix in mono. that was probably the biggest, from a technical standpoint. Learning how to mix in mono is so challenging because you can pan and you definitely want to pan if you can, but you can't pan all the way out. You can't like put one guitar on one side, another guitar on another side. Not to the extent that you can on an album, on a record in a studio.
Yeah.
And many PAs, especially kind of, smaller clubs and things, are going to be in mono. They're not even going to have a stereo option. Yeah, things are getting more modern now, and that's not as much a factor, but for a while it was when I was first doing it.
Yeah, one of these days the entire audience is going to be in-ears, right?
Yeah, exactly. Bluetooth.
Well, so that I would guess that the stuff that's cool in stereo are the widening effects and sort of ethereal reverbs and things that just make everything sort of seem spacious and trippy without hard panning, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have tons of room for trippy stuff, which is great. And, stereo keys, you can put that shit out there all day long too and make your mix sound huge, which if you can, do it. But, a lot of your more percussive things and your high-end instruments, frequency-wise, you're going to want to be closer to the middle because they're going to be the most extreme things left and right. And it depends on what kind of show you're doing. So like with Trampled, those are big stages in big theaters or big outdoor festivals. I can pan and everyone's going to hear it. But if I'm in a smaller listening room with a folk band, and it's maybe a 200 or 300 seat listening room, if I pan something off, it is really going to be extreme for people on the other side of the room or for the people on that side of the room even. So you just tend to have to keep things a little more in the center.
Yeah. Well, so thinking about the big stage, and it's interesting because we don't really talk front of house much on this show, but I'm finding this is actually a lot of fun to talk about this, probably because I know Bonnaroo and I was there for so many years. But a couple of thoughts I have is one is if you learn, so you're learning to mix in mono. So instead of separating instruments, especially in a big bunch of strings like that through panning, you're probably learning how to separate them through either EQ and or just riding the featured instrument in that moment. But also, did you ever find like the fact that they had the video feeds to be helpful too? In the same way that when you do a music video, it's like the sound gets enhanced by the video because you know what you're supposed to be listening to in that moment?
I don't watch the screens.
All right.
So I would say my direct answer to that would be not really. But, occasionally you glance over just because you're just watching something. But, you kind of check out after a while, just like you do when you're working in the studio on a record. You're just kind of living the sounds and you're not thinking about the faders and you're not thinking about your EQ, especially if you have a really dialed in show. You know what I mean? You don't need to. So, you're just kind of, at that point, you're perusing the audience while you're writing faders. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, no, it wasn't necessarily cued because usually the video folk have no idea where the sound's coming from.
Yeah.
They're way off. They're always like, if you don't know what to do, go to the vocalist. And the vocalist is like looking off to the side to point out that everyone should be watching the fiddle player right now,
Yeah.
And yet we're watching him watch somebody else. So not so much off the monitor. You start to know the songs, Yeah. I personally, when I'm mixing front of house, I'm dancing a lot of the time. I stand and am dancing, and it's kind of, I've had a lot of people come up and say they enjoyed watching me during the show, which is embarrassing. So, I get into it and I'm moving faders a lot. I'm moving pans. I'm moving EQs a lot. I set up all my effects on pre-fader sends, so they're all getting whatever I want to send to them always, and then I just push up the returns when I want to bring in a delay or if I want to bring in the reverb or a certain type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're all set up and going at all times, and then I just fade them in.
That's very cool. So let me run with that for a sec, because what that means to me is what's smart about that is when this moment happens and you're like, oh, that riff would be so great to hear an effect on it. Two things go through your mind. One is you just missed the riff if you just thought of it, right? And two is you would have had to figure out which instrument was that on there to turn up that aux send to the reverb. And if everything's going to the reverb, then whoever just made that statement in that moment, it's already in the delay or the reverb. And by bringing up the return, you're always going to catch it that moment after it happened, right?
Absolutely. And you can do cool little like plumes after something of like you can, at the end of a song, I could like plume out a reverb because it was already in there, you know what I mean? To extend some things if I know it's a dramatic moment. It doesn't work on a delay throw, because on a delay throw, you need to hit it right on the, let's say it's a word, or if it's a sound, it needs to not be there until you want it to be there.
Right.
But
and then also go away afterwards, right?
Absolutely. And I don't have any of those in this show. So I don't have to worry about that for this band, but I can see how there would be times when you would not want it to be that way. But for most of the time, when it comes to just having my general kind of, I don't know, what do you want to think of it like? This is the setting that I'm placing the band in. A short room is what I want the instruments in to not make this seem, because it's all DIs, you know what I mean? And DIs are horrible and they sound so naked. So I have, kind of a room setting that I've been developing throughout the shows that I feel works pretty well. That like, boom, the band's just in that from the word go. Then there's like a longer one that's meant for ballads, and then there's some that are just for certain instruments. And, so I might have 2 or 3 reverbs. Most of those are meant to just establish what environment is this song in. Is it an intimate song, so it's a little drier? Is it a longer, more ballady song that I want to be a little more dramatic and cinematic? But even those sometimes don't work if I'm in a smaller room. Like I have a file now that I've been like, in last time we kind of call them like a show file, which is like your preset, your template for your desk. And my show file has been because, for a long time we were coming out of the summer, we were doing big festivals all summer. And then we get into the winter and maybe we do some smaller theaters or something. And the file, the show that I have does not work at all, because it is meant for a large, huge setting. We're at a festival in front of mountains. We're at Red Rocks.
Yeah.
We're at the Gorge. Something where like a huge, expansive sounds just crush out there, and the goosebumps, you can get them so quickly if you start just riding up into this moment, this big giant reverb or something. Everyone just, or I have like a sub octave that I'll bring up on certain moments and it'll just overwhelm, and everybody just, oh, right. You get that in a smaller room, it sounds ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense, because this is a smaller, intimate room. And to throw these huge cinematic things at them is just, it doesn't make any sense. It's like watching, 2001 Space Odyssey on your phone. It just doesn't have that same connection,
Yeah.
And so
it's or the opening scene from Star Wars where it's like, you pan up and you see the Imperial.
Imagine if that was just a little like chamber orchestra, like a little quartet, you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't have that power. It just doesn't work. And so that was
can't
kind of
see it on my Apple Watch.
Yeah, that wouldn't fly.
Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. With so many fantastic iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all the iZotope plugins through their new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Well, so that's interesting. So, of course, that brings to mind a question related to the studio, which is in the studio, we can often feel like we're struggling with trying to create a mix that is supposed to work everywhere, and you don't have control over where it's going to be listened to or what the experience is going to be like. Whereas in live mixing, you're constantly adjusting for that moment and that environment. And so do you ever feel like that's an advantage where like, you're like, I know what mix to make right now because I know exactly how everybody's going to hear it?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you get that opportunity to know how the listener is going to hear it, you get to do so much more detail work. Another thing that I was doing for a while, I was managing this art collective, and we were doing really weird arty shows.
I love me some really weird arty shows.
Oh, they're the best, right? They just kind of cleanse your palate on whatever you've been working on recently.
Yeah.
And so we would go to like weird little art galleries, and we would set up and do little pop-up art shows and kind of go crazy with that.
And that was with Trampled by Turtles?
No, this was with an art collective named Fix here in Minneapolis, F to I to X, and they're mainly hip-hop music, but they've kind of branched into just doing lots of really weird art anythings. That could be a show, it could be an exhibit, it could be something online, just different stuff. With those shows, like we would have very specific shows that would be maybe a one-off, and it's got a theme, it's got very specific content, and we're going to do it in quad, or we're going to have these giant projectors, whatever it might be. And those shows, the sound I could develop exactly for that room, like, a days in advance. So I knew exactly what I wanted the listener to hear, pending where they were standing in the room. A concert, you know what I mean? You're very much at the helm of how good is this PA covering the environment, and then what are the problems, and then whatever is left, that's my show. In a studio environment, I don't really consider where the listener is going to be at all. I guess I do, in the sense that I will put it on headphones now and make sure that these things are working in headphones, just because earbuds and headphones are so specific that if I don't check them, I might find something is not gelling the way I think it should.
And where are you doing the headphone check, for the big live shows or for
no, this is for
stuff?
like an album now, if I'm in the studio.
Right, okay.
Yeah, in the studio.
Okay, well, so now one of the things I want to make sure we give a shout out to your hip hop stuff, because it's some great sounding stuff that you've been doing. So Rockstars, we have, of course, a playlist you can just click through in the show notes, scroll down if you're on your iPhone, or just click the link that will take you right over to the website, webpage. And we have a Spotify player there with Adam's work in it. And Mina Moore is one, if I'm saying it right, or Mina Moore. Mina Moore is
Mina, yeah. Her name is Yasmina.
Yeah, she's great. Those records are so awesome. And then you also did a thing, and we can circle back to more of that, but you did a cool thing, which we've got some YouTube links to as well, called Hip Hop Club, which I thought was hilarious.
Oh my God, you found that.
I found that. Yeah. This is great stuff, man. But tell us a little bit about your hip hop interactions. I mean, obviously you're doing a wide variety of music up in Minneapolis. And, I mean, let's be honest, some really good music comes out of that part of the country.
Yeah, man. I did not mean to stay in Minneapolis. I was, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in Southern Florida. And when I got into, or at least when I came up to Minneapolis to go to the Institute of Production Recording, I didn't know where Minneapolis was on the map. You know what I mean? I was into hip hop. I wanted to be Dr. Dre, and I came up here to be Dr. Dre. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? When I kind of first started getting into engineering, I quickly fell in love with the actual technical art of recording instruments, and then I steered away from producing beats and tracking down hip hop rappers and stuff. I wanted to work with instruments and bands, So mm-hmm. I'd make a diversion there. But what I didn't know is how awesome the Minneapolis music scene was going to be. And I definitely didn't know about the huge indie hip hop scene that was going on here, with specifically Rhymesayers, the record label. They have become quite a large part of the hip hop industry these days, and they're right here in Minneapolis. And at the time, and we come to indie hip hop, they were like really killing it.
Yeah.
With artists like Atmosphere and Brother Ali, they were doing some really big stuff. Murs and MF Doom, they were just kind of really killing it. And they still are. They're still doing quite well. But These are this is indie. This is like, indie rap. It wasn't stuff that you were going to hear in the mainstream community, yet they were selling out shows. And this was something that I was starting to like finally get a sense of when I was in a music town like Minneapolis is that there is a lot of awesome music in the world that most people don't know about. And it doesn't mean that those artists are starving. Obviously the music business is tough, and these days it's really hard during COVID, but there's a middle class. There was a middle class at the time. It's probably getting farther and farther right now, but finding people who are out there doing really cool stuff and making a living, that was new to me because I thought the only people that made money were Dr. Dre.
Right.
You're either huge or you have nothing, and it turned out that's not the case. And the indie hip hop world was really kicking off here, so I got to work on a bunch of cool stuff. And really learn about that. And that was a big eye opener because, like I said, I had really transitioned into wanting to focus on recording bands. And I mean, I was listening to grunge rock and all of that in the 90s. So it's like I wasn't like not into rock and roll music, but I was, I wanted to be Dre. All of a sudden, I'm like, now I want to record a drum kit and I want to record amps. And I was taking that in, and then I was also kind of working on some hip hop stuff at the same time. And I was like, wow, these genres couldn't be mixed more different. One of them, you kind of need to hear what's going on with the band as one giant unit. In hip hop, I feel like you need to really isolate your kick, your snare, and your vocal. And frankly, your vocal is really an afterthought sometimes. It's that kick and snare need to be crushing, and then you can worry about everything else. And that's not necessarily what I was doing with my rock mixes. Those I needed to be like get a little more nuance going on with all the parts, and some things were really important. This guitar lick here and how these two instruments are conversing with. In hip hop, it was like, is the kick banging? Is the snare banging? I don't really care anymore what happens.
Well, let's ask some specific stuff. So first of all, I'll give a shout out actually to the next guest. The next interview I'm doing after this one is with JJ Blair. And one of his credits was recording Body Count, which I thought you would appreciate because that was the convergence with Ice-T, I believe, of live band and hip hop.
Oh yeah, man, that's a heavy record.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. So hit me with questions for the next interview. That'll be a first on this podcast.
You got it. I'm excited.
But one of the tracks from Mina Moore is Helena, if I'm pronouncing it right, and it's got this. It was one of the last tracks on the album, I think. It has an awesome scratching, distorted vocal sound and a real heavy, fat groove. It's got that kind of, I don't know what you guys call it in hip hop, but there's a style that came out of the, early 2000s or whatever with the it's kind of like the snare lands, but you got like 5 other things that land at the same time, It's kind of this junky clap on the snare, and I love that. But just if you can remember anything about that or remember anything about that kind of scratching, distorted vocal, it reminded me a lot of Portishead as well. And I just thought it was badass sounding.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Geez, I definitely don't remember what I did, but because at that time I was using different plugins, right? So it's like a whole new world. But that was definitely Mix in the Box.
Did you have a role in the production as well?
Yeah, I recorded that record.
So you would have created the scratching vocals and stuff, or you would have at least interacted with somebody to do that?
Absolutely, yeah. And the way we would have tracked the vocals straight up. If I had a bet, I was using either an SM7 or like a Kiwi, like a blue Kiwi for the vocal.
Nice.
And I would have been using one of those. And then what we had done in post, it could have been anything. I was really into the vinyl plugin by Isotope for some of that stuff. Cause it's got so many different weird vinyl bad things, like warble and dust and, stuff like that. It could have been that. I'd have to go back and listen to it and tell you specifically. But that was probably what we were doing, is some version of something that was emulating the sound of just a bad record player. We are also using samples that Mina had on her iPhone. So she was also recording things to her iPhone, which I believe would have been just with a standard Apple, audio recorder or whatever. their little
memo app, or voice
yeah.
memo.
She was using that a lot, and she would go and have conversations with people, and then she would bring it in against their knowledge, and we'd sample it. So then we would record that. Like we tried doing it where we would take like the output, the headphone jack, which existed then, off of the phone, and we found that it was cooler when we just mic'd the phone.
Yeah.
So we were just micing the phone, and usually I would try to muffle it a bit because they're so sharp. So maybe put like a towel or something around the phone so that it comes out and it's not quite as much high end.
That's great.
But it's not going to change it much. You're still going to have to go into post and mangle it.
So I've had good luck with that too, using the iPhone to play a keyboard part as an overdub. It actually fit beautifully by just holding the phone up to the vocal mic and just playing a little part in. And it's just a great reminder, because I think as engineers, we get stuck on that stuff a lot. We're like, oh my God, I got to break out the manual because this has a digital light pipe connection, and I must go in digital at the same sample rate for my session to make this thing work. And it's like, no, man, just play it out of a speaker and stick it in front of a vocal mic.
Absolutely. If you can capture a sound in a cooler way, I think it's more often than not you connect better than you do if you recreate it synthetically in the computer. Now, there's great examples of both, so there's not a rule, but if you can put a vocal through a carpet tube, have someone sing into a carpet tube and put a mic at the end of it, or a hose, or you have them sing into a bucket and you put a mic. These things are all going to have hugely cooler outcomes than trying to sift through presets in plugins. There's a record I did early on that kind of opened this up for me. It was a band called Hyder Ali, and we had done what someone had told me, so I didn't invent it, but using like a water jug, like a Zephyrhills water jug or something. Yeah. And putting a mic inside the jug, dangling the mic so it's just hanging in there, and put it somewhere in the room around the drum kit or whatever. In this case, I was using it for drums. And it was the coolest sounding mic I had for that whole record. And I could bring it in whatever I wanted. It sounded more unique than anything I'd ever heard. And of course, it had like glaring problems. So you got to go in there and like EQ the stuff to taste, but you can get some wild stuff. Room miking is of a similar mindset to me. I want to put a room mic on everything I record for a similar reason. It's going to do something cool, and you can always not use it. So why not get it, Yeah,
it can make it sound so much more interesting. Sometimes just moving the mic away from the thing that you're recording, just, like I have a Lowry Symphonic Holiday, old school analog keyboard synth upstairs in the studio. And I've found that a lot of times just setting up a large diaphragm that's like 5 feet away from it and just capturing it in the room gives that keyboard pad the perfect sound to blend right into the track, especially because it was probably an overdub added later.
Sure.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. I want to circle back before we get too far away. Again, the Mina Moore track had this great scratching on the vocal where it's like, Adam, that kind of thing. And I just want to know, how do you do that stuff? Is that like, do you take the vocal that's recorded and then use one of these DJ apps to kind of replay it into the session?
Oh, if it was literally scratching, okay, you're talking like that. Okay, then yes, it was, if I'm not mistaken, that would have been an artist named Andrew Broder. And I hope I'm not saying the wrong person, but I'm pretty sure that was Andrew Broder because he's usually who I bring in for scratchy stuff.
Right.
And I think he was just probably using Serato. You know what I mean?
Okay, so Serato would be that's the name I was trying to remember too. That would be the jam for that.
Yeah, I think he was on Serato, and I've done that quite a bit. And bless Serato's heart for giving you the ability to do that. I know there's a bunch of them that can do it now, but the quick sampling of a vocal and then giving it to a DJ to cut up in that context of like a hip hop or an R&B track, oh, priceless.
All right,
compared to like what they used to have to do, right?
Okay, so quick question for those of us who are thinking like, oh, I want to try that. What is it? Is it kind of a dumb idea for us? Do we have to buy like a mixer controller and then hook that up to Serato, only to discover that you got to really know how to scratch records to get a good thing going, or is it worth experimenting with?
If you're not already doing that, you're talking about an art form. That's like hearing a guitar on a record and being like, oh, I should put a guitar on my record and
Dude,
not knowing
how do you think
guitar.
we got started with this shit, man?
That's totally right. I'm not going to deny that if you're interested, yeah, do it, because it's super fun. And like anything else, you'll figure it out if you put the time into it. But you don't need anything particular. As far as I know, with Serato, the magic is in the vinyl itself and a little interface. So the Serato, I think, is a program that's got a little interface that you hook up to your computer, and then the record is like a special record that you put on your standard DJ tables, and that record is putting out time code to the interface. I don't know how it's doing it, and so you just take your normal tables or your normal record player, you put this special vinyl on it that is what Serato is, and then whatever file you have queued up in the software program, that's what it's playing. And you can do anything that you can do with your tables now. It's tremendous.
Now, what about my Fisher-Price record player, the one that plays the little music box? Can I spin that? Can I try scratching that on the music box?
If I'm not telling the story wrong, if that is how it works, absolutely do that, right? Why would you not want to? Because it's going to do it at a weird speed and have a weird needle. And that's just like putting the water jug out there with the mic in it. It's just going to be a weirder sound.
That's awesome, man. All right, so let's keep pivoting. I got all kinds of questions all over the place here. Let's back up really quickly to your beginnings. Your studio you're in now, Bellows. Tell us all about Bellows. What is that world for you? Are you sitting in your studio now? And if so, if you look to your left, your right, and in front of you, what do you see?
Awesome. I am in my studio right now. I'm in the cutting space. Right now, if I look in front of me, I see a Peluso P67 and an SM7B hooked up for a vocal setup, and they're aimed at the exact same spot, so I can pick which one I like. Nice. And then to my left, I have kind of my wall of stuff that's like guitar pedals, microphone boxes, just cables, stuff like that. To my right is a Rhodes, a Roland Microcube amp, which I actually really adore. It's a tiny little battery powered amp that's got built-in effects. It's like one of those classic, like, I want to reamp this in something stupid fast, and it's perfect for that. You can just take a vocal mic and plug it into it and just make it make a noise in the corner of the room to change the ambience of your room or something.
That's cool.
Stuff like that. Anyway, so I've got that to my right, and then there's a drum kit in front of me a little ways down the way too, and all the other stuff.
So I like the wall of stuff, and it reminds me, like, I get a little too much stuff in my studio, and I was just wondering if I could store some of my stuff at your studio.
Honestly, that is the one thing. If I could build Bellows again, is I would build more storage. There's no storage here, and so it's like stuff tucked behind couches, underneath couches, behind chairs, in corners, stacked up, and then I put like something cool in front of it so they don't have to like stare at a box of ugly stuff over in the corner.
Yeah. And I'm spacing right now on the name. Dang it, I should know this, but the company, there's a company out there. Give them a very brief shout out, but which will allow you to make your hardware available, and then somebody can log in and you can upload and mix through it online, which is a brilliant idea for the future of, combining, using the internet and combining hardware and plugins to mix and stuff. But I love the idea of taking it to the next step further, which is the one where we don't have to keep any more cables and adapters around the studio. You just like put a plugin on and I tap in to your box of stuff on your wall up at your studio. And now I have like all the XLRs I need for my session.
That Boy, I don't know. I feel like that's too much good.
That's too much good all at once.
You know what I mean? Like you'll have to be in the queue of 180 people who are currently running things through that Fairchild.
Yeah, that's a lot of connections. They say, fewer connections in your signal chain is better.
So, yeah, man. Yeah, the conversion to go through the air and back, I'm out.
I'm out. All right. So there's some other cool stuff at your studio. Well, let me ask you before I point out the stuff that I did see. Talk to us about monitoring. So we mentioned mixing for the studio versus mixing live and how to know whether your mix sounds right. What do you like to listen on, and what are some important tools for you to make sure that your mixes are translating?
Sure. I would say, as we all know, monitoring couldn't be more subjective. So you got to find the thing that works for you. I think the big quest for me was finding not necessarily what I liked, but what was making me do the right things. So I landed on a pair of NS10s with a Yamaha SW10 sub, a 10-inch subwoofer. So I have a 2.1 that is my bread and butter of where the majority of my mixing is done. But another, the second most important, if not after about halfway through the mix, I switch over to a pair of KEFs, KEF. And they're actually my old mentor when I first got hired at the studio called Master Mix. You had mentioned it at the top of the interview. My mentor, his name was this guy named Tom Tucker. Unfortunately, he passed away. But at the time, these were in his lounge, these KEF speakers. And they're just kind of hi-fi standard, almost like a tower, like a big wood box speaker that everyone had back when. Now everyone's just got like a little Bluetooth speaker. But we used to get big stereos at our houses, you know? And so this was a big stereo that he had in his lounge at Master Mix, and he had it wired in off his SSL. And so when he wanted to, he would go check the mix when he was kind of getting to the end of it on the KEFs. When he passed away, his son, Tommy Jr., asked me if I wanted them. And of course I did, mostly for nostalgia reason. Also, I just thought they were cool.
Yeah.
Those have turned out to be my favorite pair of speakers to mix on. I will mix on those things, and they're just speakers. They're just a classic hi-fi stereo. And so those are behind me. So my NS10s are directly in front of me, directly behind me along the couch, you know what I mean? Where the client would sit are these big KEF speakers. And those I spend at least a third of the mix on, if not the whole last part of the mix. It's
now,
just
would you mix hearing those backwards, or would you like make a move, turn around and listen, and then turn around again?
I'll definitely make moves with them behind me. I'm looking the other direction. I do have it set so that left is left if you're looking at them. So when I flip, if I'm looking forward at my NS10s and I switch to the back speakers, the panning flips. But then if I turn around, the panning is correct.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I didn't like compensate so that I could mix looking one direction and everything on the left is on the left, and everything on the right is the right. I did keep it true so that when I turn around, or if I want to listen with a client, because they're more fun to listen to than NS10s, obviously, then they're staring at the speakers, the panning is accurate.
Right.
But I definitely will do a lot of work with them behind me. So they're hitting the back of my ears, which once you kind of learn your speakers, you can do anything. But it took a while to get used to that a little bit because it's obviously darker from behind than it is from in front.
Can you make $10 million?
I don't even know what to do with that question. I hope so. Can you make $10 million?
No, you said you could do anything. Once you learn your speakers, you could do anything. I was just trying to push it a little bit there.
Shit, you're right.
Trying to encourage us all.
You know what? I'm going to say I hope so. I think over a career's worth of me using those, yes, I'll hit 10 million.
Well, since they were built, for sure.
Exactly, for sure. Especially with the records that Tuck did on them before I got to them.
Nice, man. Well, and so maybe one thing to remind us though is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm gonna guess that when we find those hi-fi speakers that we really like for doing the mix on, we just need to remember that there's still maybe a difference between workhorse speakers for a studio that you're recording in versus a hi-fi one that you might mix on. Like if you were cutting drums and bass and this, somebody's playing in the studio, do you find that those ones you feel a little more nervous about pushing the boundaries, the volume on those for an artist in the studio, or is that not even a concern?
No, I'm way more fragile with those. Those cannot handle the plosives and the low end pumps and thumps, or just pure, voltage. They can't handle that. No, I'm very protective of them. Once again, I've got some sentimental value because they were my old mentors. Two, they have become a workhorse for me, and I don't want them to get screwed up because those speakers are old and worn. And even if I could track down replacements, they won't be as worn as well. So I kind of really don't want to pop them. And they would pop fast, I think. I really think they would pop fast. So no, I don't hit them very hard. And I make sure that if I have guest engineers in the studio, they don't pop those things either, and just say, like, you can listen to them, just don't crank it.
Don't even look at it. Don't even look at them.
Exactly.
Little Spinal
These
Tap
ones
for
go
you, rock
to
stars.
6.
Yeah, these ones go to 2, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go to 6. Cool, man. Well, we won't comment on whether or not 6 is half of 11 or not.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
it's
goodness.
On the top half.
It's on the top half. All right. Dig it.
But yeah, my biggest thing with monitoring is I had to find what translated best. So, I had Mackie HR824s back when those were the jam. I've considered moving on to a lot of other monitors. The Focal seem really exciting. But when I mix on my NS10s, even if I'm angry at them, when I go and listen in my car, or I go and listen at my speakers at home, they're the truest. The way it sounded when I heard it at the studio is the way it's translating, and I have to stick with that, at least as far as the way it's been going so far.
Awesome. I'm a huge fan of using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice right now in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription options. For only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual Mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Adam Krinsky, joining us to talk about mixing in Minnesota. Mixing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. How's that? That's like a triple M. If it's triple M's, is that still alliteration, Adam?
I think so. I think once you hit 3, you're in the alliteration category.
All right, sweet. Are you ready to jam, dude?
Let's do it.
All right, so you're telling us about your studio, Bellows. It sounds like an awesome place. There are some more things I noticed in the photo of your studio that I wanted to ask you about. So, for example, it looks like you may have the new Mac Pro.
I do. I have the 2019 Mac Pro.
Tell us about that jam.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, you gotta get past that price tag. You just have to. You can't not talk about it.
Right.
I'd spent a time as soon as they announced it, saving up for it, and it was crazy expensive. So once I had like gulped
Can you
down,
drop a number on us? I mean, because like sometimes when I look, I'm like 25 grand,
right?
but I don't know
I
if I
got the
really need to spend
16
that much.
core, and at the end of it, the computer itself was
Okay.
$9,000. But when you do all the things, because there's so many things you do after that,
Right.
I think it came out to a little over 12 grand is what it took me to make that upgrade.
Impressive.
And dude, that fucking hurt, man.
You're allowed to say that.
That's where I'm gonna drop your F-bomb, because that fucking hurt. That was a lot of money, but I had to do it. I was rocking a 2010, and I was running into sample rate issues where, as people are getting more into using higher sample rates, including me wanting to move up into some higher sample rates past 48K, my computer just couldn't handle it. So I had to do it, and other things, hardware was becoming hard, to upgrade when you can't get a connector to connect to FireWire 800 and so on and so forth. So it was an inevitability, and I knew that I wanted to do it, and I had to spend about a year and a half touring with Trampled to save up for something like that.
Wow.
What I mean?
It's dedication, though, and it reminds us of like, how much we love what we do, that like we'll be willing to save up for something like that in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working enough. That's how I was able to justify it, is like there's literally always multiple projects going on at once. And I do, I usually start my day around 11 a.m. I get home by about 6. I do that Monday through Friday. And then I'm in the weekend when I have to be. And that's like every day, all year long.
And no children starved in the process?
No children starved, although I did fall victim to the COVID puppy.
The COVID puppy. So you're now a proud puppy papa?
I'm now a proud puppy papa, and
More
she's
alliteration.
awesome. But holy shit, man, she's a puppy. She's driving me crazy.
Right on.
But so, a big thing I always say that I've found later in my career that is most important, and this is going off topic, so you can reel me in here, but it's finding balance. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I got to witness people make that mistake. And I was always in awe of when I saw people doing it well with some degree of balance. And so, working the Monday through Friday and trying to take the weekends off was a component of trying to find balance in my life. The puppy is an example of trying to find some balance in my life so that I'm not completely lost. There's years where I was doing nothing but making records all day long. And when I would go out and socialize, I had no idea how to even talk to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. And I also was really only capable of talking to anybody if I just finished a record. Then all of a sudden I was like all about the scene for a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, not necessarily the best of lives. To each his own for sure. But there are years in the beginning of my career where I think it was important that I was doing nothing else but thinking about audio and where to put a mic and what EQ and what compressor and how is that person doing that and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's learning your craft and learning your trade, and you got to do that. But eventually you're going to fall so far out of balance that you might not have a full life. And I wanted to have a full life. There's other things that were important. I think touring also opened my eyes to that and finding balance just in audio for myself of just different things to inspire you.
Yeah. Plus, I imagine it was touring's a little bit of a different experience. So it's a lot of sound for a focused length of time. And then maybe the rest of the day is just everything, getting somewhere or setting stuff up or tearing stuff down.
Yeah, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's a lot of like physical labor for a short period of time and then waiting for 7-8 hours, especially if you're the headliner. You're the first one in, the last one out, and your show's the latest. So, we get up for Trampled, we're up at maybe 10 a.m. and we got maybe 6 hours to do the build. And then the band is waking up around 2-3 in the afternoon, and you've been up all morning getting the PA up and tuned. And then they come in, they have to sound check in their PJs for 30 minutes just to make sure that their in-ears are sounding good. And then they're done until they go on at 9 or 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for you, you're working even after they've sound checked to button everything up and get the next band transitioned and make that plan all figured out. And then you're maybe rushing to dinner, and then you got to get back. And then you sit around while all the bands play for hours, and that's just boring. That part's tough.
Maybe that answers my question. But in the studio, you potentially, especially if you're in the recording process, you could have loud sound going for 8 to 12 hours pretty consistently. And I wondered if the live sound was like, loud, but a shorter period of time. But I guess if you have to listen to other opening bands for hours, other than putting earplugs in, you may still be surrounded by a lot of loudness.
Honestly, I don't, unless they're friends or a band I'm excited about, I am not even in the building.
Yeah.
When the other bands are playing.
How could you be? I mean, you'd wear yourself out before it was time for you to start mixing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important. That's the other thing I'd say I've learned is taking care of my ears over the years. I've tried to be better at it because of these things. And that was definitely one of the reasons why I also didn't want to get into live sound, is I didn't want to bang on my ears. And the only thing I've done to manage that is I just don't work with loud bands.
Right.
And so, folk bands, singer-songwriters, weird little indie art projects and, things like that, in smaller rooms, you're going to probably not be banging on your ears. You start working with hip hop acts, rock bands, you're going to be shredding your ears way harder. Now, I will say Trampled, as I said, I wanted it to be a quieter, more intimate sound, and it did not work. So Trampled has turned out to become a louder show, but I'm having too much fun to not do that at this point. But in the studio, I would say yes. Ear fatigue, especially when you're mixing, is a real big deal. One thing I've been doing as far as my kind of just dealing with amount of times my ears are getting bashed on is when I come into the studio, when I start the day, and this is something I've been doing in the last few months. I've never heard anybody doing it. If you've heard of it, let me know. But I'll spend maybe the first 20 minutes, I'll put a pair of headphones on and no sound. Just let my ears completely relax.
Right.
As quiet as I can get my ears to be, between caffeine or weed or some stupid thing that I did the night before. My ears might be tense, or a conversation that I had that's got me emotional. My ears will tense up. I can feel that now. I can hear that for sure. And so I give my ears a chance to fully relax before I start my day of mixing. And I think, if you have to, then you do what you have to do. If you have to put in a 10 or a 12-hour day because of some deadlines, you do what you got to do. But not built by design. The way I have it built is I do like 6 hours a day. And that's plenty for me to not let my ears close up on me. And if I feel my ears closing up on me, I'll just take a break, and you can feel it.
Hey, Adam, just let me know if you need me to take it easy on the podcast, okay?
Well, right now you're really, really loud.
Oh, sorry about that.
Maybe I should just turn my headphones down. Yeah, right. No, but that's the biggest thing to me is just trying to get my ears at a relaxed state now. I don't know. Have you experienced this? Like your ears? Do you feel your ears change?
I definitely feel my ears. I think I feel them change. I'm not mixing every day, so I may not be quite as attuned to that if as you might be for that. But I love taking breaks. One of the favorite things I got from my studio, probably one of my favorite pieces of gear, was after working with Bill Skibby at Key Club Recording. He had earmuffs, gun earmuffs hanging up in the studio. So whenever you had to go out and around all the loud stuff, you just pop those on. And what a relief to like have those and pop those over my ears and then go right up to a drum and start moving a mic and not have it matter at all, hardly. So it's not quite as what you're saying of being silent, but just being like really cautious. And I'm aware of my ears in that like I quickly transition from listening to something cranked up to just turning it way down, Like the moment I feel uncomfortable, that shit's going down. Like I don't want to suffer through anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in a mix, as soon as you start to question your high end, especially if it's later in the mix, you probably need to stop working on that song. Not because your high end is a problem, it's because you're misjudging it all of a sudden. If you're second guessing your high end, it's because your ears are fooling you right now, or your brain is fooling you right now. You need to get away.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I've learned to do that I really enjoy also is turning the mix way down low and listening, like one click up in mono on a small speaker, because you can really start hearing some balances. You just hear what disappears and what's not going to be heard from the clock radio across the room,
Absolutely.
But what's funny is I'll turn it way down, and then I'm sitting there trying to listen, and everybody in the room takes that as an opportunity to start like elevating their voices and telling. So
right?
I'm like, I tell my interns, I'm like, hey man, I'm trying to listen to this right now.
Yeah.
Would you shut the fuck up?
Yeah, exactly. No intern, definitely not an intern, but not even an assistant should ever be talking unless talking to spoken to. I was an assistant for a while, and I mean, I got really lucky. I hope everybody on their way up gets a chance to be an assistant, for that matter, an intern, because it's so important to know that it's a key role. I don't think they should feel bad about that job. That is a tremendous job that you learn more about and are more integral than almost anybody in the room. Also, nobody wants to hear anything you have to say. Sorry.
Well, it's funny. I've really analyzed that because I've been an intern and assistant, and now I have them. And I see things that an intern and assistant might do. And I think I'm like, dude, you did the same thing when you were an intern yourself,
Absolutely.
And I was thinking about it. I'm like, why? I mean, I'm doing it on this podcast right now, right? You're the guest, but here I am talking. It's the question of like, why do you want to say something when you're an intern or an assistant, or even if you're just new in the room? I think it's because we want to be accepted and we want to demonstrate that we know something.
Yes. And it's trying to have a presence.
Yeah, it's just trying to be acknowledged. But what we don't realize at first is that by doing the talking instead of the listening, again, here I go, right? I would have been missing an opportunity to learn something because I could have just been listening. Like I can still prove that I'm, great in the studio later on, but right now it's a great chance to learn from somebody.
Absolutely. I mean, the opportunity to learn something is every second when you're in there. Like you're learning every second by watching the body language, the way they communicate, the way they make decisions. And every time in your mind you say, I would have done that differently, that's great. That's learning what you shouldn't do is just as important as what you should do. So, make those judgments. But the deal is if they didn't have to have you there, they wouldn't have brought you in. You know what I mean? So You're there because they need you there to do a certain job. But at the end of the day, as far as your involvement in the conversation or the dialogue, that's a tightrope walk that you need to be really conservative with. And that, your personality is definitely a big reason on how interns become assistants and how assistants become firsts. Is your personality. You shine, people trust you, they like you. So it's not that you need to be a ghost, but you need to really be in the back seat. You need to follow the lead of the room. And if you can't read it, then do less when it comes to conversing. Now, when it comes to the work, you need to be ahead of everybody. But when it comes to the conversing, you need to be on the conservative side for a while until they just can't stop talking to you. You know what I mean? Or they just, they've really given you a wide open invite. Other than that, just stay quiet because the people who are in that room for a very specific reason. Somebody along the lines, whether it's the artist, the producer, somebody said, these are the people that are going to be in here this day. They didn't invite a bunch of extra people on purpose. And you are, frankly, as far as the commentary, an extra person who did not need to be there. So don't break that line and you'll be fine. You can stay there and do all the things that you want to do. Just don't be definitely don't be making suggestions creatively.
Right. Should we be singing a possible harmony every time the chorus plays by?
You should not be singing a harmony. You should not be eating carrots. You should not be doing any of these things that would make people have to pay attention to you for even a moment. Because it is the magic of the studio is that creative energy, and we are all chasing it, whether you're the artist, the producer, the engineer, the studio owner. We're all looking for that magic creative space where everybody feels safe. Everybody is just throwing ideas out as fast as they can get them because they're so inspired. They feel like they could do anything in that environment. They have so much comfort and freedom. And you have to, that takes a while for people to be able to understand how to navigate that environment and not ruin it, because it's so fragile and it's so fleeting. And the last thing you need is to be doing that and be in this environment and be creating this type of vibe and trying to get it going, and then have some person out of nowhere completely throw it off. And that may or may not happen, but why risk it? Don't be that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just stay quiet, and you will get hired more and you will be asked to be on a session more as an assistant if people trust that you will not make mistakes. They may or may not go with the person who they know is extra good if they think that person will ruin the vibe.
Right.
But if you're not going to ruin the vibe, you will be in there way more than the others. And it's happened. And I was an assistant. I made mistakes. As you described, every assistant did it. And when you have an assistant and you see them doing it, the reason why it annoys you is because you did it at one point in time too. And you're like, oh, I remember that. Don't do that. You know what I mean? And we keep passing that on down the line, which is why it's important to have some level of apprenticeship,
Yeah. One of my funny moments that I remember was being in the control room with producer in the back. I'm up at front and my back's turned to the room, and my assistant or my intern was right next to me and right behind me. And he jumped in with a creative suggestion in the middle of a conversation. And I, without even turning around, I just picked up my phone and I texted him from like literally 1.5 feet in front of him. I sent him a text.
Yeah, exactly.
Shut it down,
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's the best thing ever, that you were just texted him, because I was bitched out in front of everybody numerous times. And it wasn't necessarily because I had talked or made a creative suggestion. I knew better already. It was just, whatever was going on, they were upset and they needed the scapegoat. That's where I was at. I was like, I'm following the rules. I'm not talking, and I'm still getting bitched at. You know what I mean? But it would have been way better if they could have just texted me their rant and I didn't have to get publicly humiliated.
Right.
I think that was a classier way of handling it.
One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the JZ microphone pop filter in front of a mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. The STX-100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX-100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX-100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Yeah, I mean, it even happened recently where an intern sang a harmony. And the funny thing is, so I did a record recently where the artist and the producer took advantage of the fact that I and the intern and assistant all played instruments, and they were like, "Great, can you jump on bass?" So that was really fun to do, to get invited to be a player on it. But then later in the control room, I noticed there was this moment where the producer and the artists were thinking about like what to put on next. And the intern sang, instinctively, because you don't always realize you're doing it at first, sang a harmony to something. And then I
Sure.
just saw in that moment, the producer just like derailed his train of thought for a split second, turned over and looked at the intern, and then went back. And even that small, subtle thing, I was like, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. It's like, you have to learn that those creative suggestions, they just sort of mildly disrupt a creative process, even if it's for a moment, and you don't want to do that.
Absolutely. It's just because it's a foreign entity in a conversation. It could even be the best idea.
Right.
It's not about that. It's like in this scenario, there are 2 people, 3 people in the middle of a conversation, and they're walking a tightrope that is slowly like working its way out. You know what I mean? You don't even know where it's going yet. And for you to jump in, all of a sudden it's like a breeze comes through and just blows it. Either you're going to be able to stay and continue that train of thought, or you've lost it for whatever reason. And that is like, to the people who are supposed to be in that room, the largest offense you can commit. Even if it was even if you have Mariah Carey's vocal and you come in with that high harmony, everyone's still going to be like, we weren't ready for that shit, man. Easy. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's not personal too. It could have been anybody.
No. Yeah.
And
you make the good point. Of course, it probably is a brilliant idea. You, an intern, an assistant, an engineer, any of us, we wouldn't even be in the room if we didn't have great ideas. Otherwise, why would we spend our time in a recording studio? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's a conversation that is not being had that is built on trust, and the conversations that existed prior to the moment when you're actually laying down a track that this intern is not hip to. They don't know. You don't know the motivation of the producer and where they're trying to push an artist or what they're trying to get out of them. You might see something that seems out of whack and think that you need to straighten it out. It might be out of whack on purpose. They might be asking someone to do something on purpose. You might be, oh, well, why would you do that as an easier way? What? No, I want them to do it the harder way because I'm looking to get something out of them, so on and so forth. You just don't know. You're not invited in that part of the conversation. So just don't do it. The safest way is to just be quiet if you're not sure. And if someone talks to you, be the best version of you can be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
that's it.
And that actually is a great example from this record that I just did, where it's like the producer and the artist came in with a very like left of center approach to how to do this stuff. And, they sort of acknowledged that it's like, don't worry about what this looks like right now. Like we got a vision for it. And, even for me, it's like, as somebody, made records for 30 years, it's taken me a long time to get to that comfort spot where you're like, I'm totally comfortable with helping people do a thing, even if I just totally don't get it yet.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And those are some of the more exciting projects sometimes, when you don't know what's going to happen.
Hopefully they're going to take it to some place where you're like, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense to me right now. And then it comes back and you're like, wow. Well, and that goes to show the brilliance of, composing something and really knowing what you want, having a brilliant producer, most likely, and having someone that can really like take something and polish it up into something that you didn't even know it was. And that's something I find actually more unique to hip hop tracks. Because, there's usually a bunch of layered stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You were mentioning back with that Me No More record, that lazy kind of snare where it's a stack of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was a situation where the producer on that record was a guy named Casey O'Brien. He was also the bass player, and he had a really specific vision from before we had recorded one sound and was sticking to it and saying the same things at the very end of the last day of mixing. Like he knew what he wanted. And that one, all those snares are stacked with snaps. So we'd stand around a microphone and snap our fingers.
Oh, it's great that you guys made them all.
Oh, and we didn't duplicate and copy and paste. We did, and I mean, you had to take breaks because your fingers hurt after one pass.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And we stacked those. I think we tripled the snaps, and then we had claps, and we tripled the claps. Yes, I'm quite certain I recorded all of those in mono because we were going to stack them. And I'm sure that I had a room mic up, and I'm sure that annoyed me when I went to mix it because it's just a lot of tracks to manage at that point. But yeah, that's snaps, claps, layered with the snare, all performed, full takes, no cutting, unless there was like some really errant snap or something. Would leave them.
Is there somebody named the Errant Snapper?
It should be. And then the last step of that was we pushed them all back. Like we made them, because, you know, it's hard to clap lazy unless you're a percussionist. You know what I mean? Unless you really have good feel. And some of us had better feel than others. Not everyone in that room was a percussionist. In fact, I'm pretty sure the snaps and claps, there was only the drummer was the only actual percussionist amongst us. So, you know, we were all playing pretty ahead or right on the beat. No one had great feel. So then afterwards, we went through and nudged everything back. I couldn't tell you what it was. I'm sure we did it by ear, but I'm going to guess 20 milliseconds at least, like a good amount, so that they were audibly lazy. They were way back there. And that flam of the snare and the snaps, multiple claps, that just kind of washy pocket is what's so cool. It leaves everybody all the room in the world to dance around the pocket. The pocket is massive now. So, you know, at that point, as far as Mina going to sing over it, she can dance rhythmically all she wants because the pocket is massive, you know?
Right.
And the bass, we took the bass and we pushed it way back too, because we were going for like a D'Angelo thing. And if you listen to those D'Angelo records with Pino on bass, I mean, you're talking about some really far back bass. You know, it is way late. But not at that point. It's not late. It's cool. It's pocket. It's stretching that hole open, and it's great. It's super fun. So we were doing a lot of that with that one to kind of create that mood, that really like sloppy, lazy downbeat. You know what I mean?
And I love that sound. And that's wasn't Questlove who played drums with D'Angelo on some of those records?
Yeah, there's some really, I think Russell Elevato is the engineer who did those records, and the interviews and the things you can dig up. There is a entire education and a style that is kind of built on those records. And Quest was playing drums. I think, if I'm not mistaken, some of the stories is that D'Angelo was late or was always late or was whatever he was doing. He wasn't necessarily there. And so I believe Erykah Badu just kind of grabbed his band while they were in that studio and just had them record some of her stuff. And if you listen to some of her records, like Mama's Gun, it's like it's the same band with the same feel, with a very similar production. It's like, yeah, because she was just stealing Quest's or D'Angelo's band for a few hours while they were waiting for D.
And then that brings up kind of the Jay Dilla vibe too, which is recreating that same thing in programmed beats, I think.
Oh, Jay Dilla is a pioneer and a hero, and also sadly missed. Yeah, absolutely. All those guys were, you know, that's a whole style, is like the less metronomic versus the all over the place, whatever, it's ahead, it's behind, you know. And there's that drummers like Chris Day or Chris Dave or whatever it is. He likes to plays acoustic drums, but like his hat and his snare are never together. And you listen to a lot of more traditional drum thinking, they want those things as metronomic as possible. If you flam your hats and snares or your kicks and hats or whatever, you know, there are producers that'll jump on you for that. And there are now genres that are built on doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad, because it feels awesome.
That's great. So then a reminder, Rockstars, again, just go over to the show notes, scroll down, or click through to the website blog post, and you can see the playlist there, the Spotify playlist. Check it out. Mina Moore, Amongst Ourselves is the album. But I'm doubly excited to go listen to it now that I know that you guys didn't even loop and use samples. You actually built all that stuff Moment by moment.
Moment by moment. And you'll also notice by the end of the tracks, the meatiness of the snaps is waning because everyone's fingers are hurting so much.
It's going vegan on you.
That's looking right. Yeah, less meat.
So another item that you have in the studio that I couldn't help noticing is the fader port by PreSonus, the single fader vibe. Yeah. And of course, now Avid makes that with the Control app too. Talk about how, if it's not useful, let us know. But if it is, let us know how that's been useful to you. Should people be considering like a one fader vibe for their studio?
I'll tell you, the one piece of hardware that I would not want to not have when I'm going to actually do a mix is at least that fader. And for me, it's always been that fader. I just had to get a new one. I had the kind of black and silver grayish one that was kind of the original fader port. And I watch people destroy those things, especially schools, just crush through those little fader ports. And, PreSonus makes them. And they would just get broken in like weeks. I had one that lasted me like 12 years, like most of my career. And I got it early on because I couldn't afford a large control surface and I wanted to have a fader. I use it every day. I use it constantly. I use it 100% to do fader automation, and that's it. I don't use it for transport. I don't use it for the quick keys. I don't use it for panning. I don't even scroll to different tracks with it. I don't use it for muting or soloing. I use it 100% just to automate volume. And
the ride, though, not like building a rough balance of the mix, though.
Nope. Just writing automation, just automation. So the quick key in Pro Tools is Control Shift, and then you click on the track's nameplate and it cycles your control surface, whatever your control surface is, to that track. That's what I do. So I just Control Shift click, and then the fader's on that track. And I'm automating I do almost 90% of my automation with that one fader, and mine first finally died. I'm very sad. I won't even get rid of it because I'm like, this thing is, it's like black with finger oil. It's like disgusting.
Nice.
But I used them. I definitely used them. So I had to go to the new one, and I'll say the new one, which is all black, is different in that the fader is longer, like the throw is a longer throw. And so I've been having to go through a bit of a transition with that because what used to be my finger move is now a smaller move because it's a longer throw. So I have more resolution in there. So because it used to be shorter, my move, what used to be maybe a dB or 2 dB, is now, a half a dB, a dB. So I'm having to make that adjustment, but whatever, it's fine.
You're starting to mix into the gray zone.
Ooh, into the gray zone.
The gray zone is where we all start out with mixing, and we try and balance everything perfectly, and you just end up with a perfect beige, perfect gray for your whole mix, and nothing's interesting at all.
That's definitely a lesson I had to learn, is that if something needs to be loud, that means something else has to be quiet. You can't make everything the same level. It's just a boring ass mix.
Nice.
But yeah, the fader port for sure is huge. I use it constantly. I would say it's an affordable fader option that is totally worth it. It does its job perfectly well. If you want those other things, cool. I frankly wish they would give me one that was just the fader and nothing else.
Have you been tempted by, maybe you just answer this question, but have you been tempted by having a larger mixer that would give you like 24, 32 faders so you can actually start building the balance there? Or do you find
Absolutely. I think I would. They're still expensive enough that I can't justify it. There are more affordable options, but they're not as good. So it's like, well, I don't want to waste money on something that I don't like. So, I think if I could get, one of these new Avid desks, I would do it, but they're so expensive that my fader port does the job just fine.
Yeah. I actually did just get the Avid S1, and so I'm just in the beginning stages of learning it, but I'm pretty impressed with it so far. It's just
That's
cool.
Good to know. That would probably be where I would start.
Plus just the graphics, the little display looks like, it makes me think it's got these bouncing dots when it's in like screen. What do you call it? Screensaver mode. And it just reminds me of old school Asteroids. And I'm like,
Oh,
yes.
wow, that's awesome. I didn't even know it did that. We used to call it Vegas mode. Do they have it like as Vegas mode?
No, but I also do have the PreSonus 64S Series 3, and that thing is awesome as well. And I've taken that down to Bonnaroo for my studio there. And that does sort of have it has a Mardi Gras mode, which is their version of Vegas mode.
There you go. Yeah, those things were fun to, like, when I was at a school, to like turn it on and then leave the room and see if the people who were coming behind you knew how to shut it off.
Yeah, there you go. Rockstars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments, with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. So, another thought, just a quick pivot, is one of the Christmas items I got for my daughter was a Oculus Quest 2, I think is that what it's called. I'm getting all confused because we were just talking about Questlove.
Oh, right.
But is the virtual reality goggles.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
And
like the Oculus, the real deal.
Yeah, and it's super fun to get in there, to put those on, and all of a sudden you're in this 3D space playing a game. And I'm telling you, I don't know how long we have to wait, but the idea, the thrill of thinking like one of these days I might just pop on some goggles and like, physically move around to control the computer instead of having to worry about the faders, or instead of having to worry about, clicking with the mouse and looking on a screen. It's pretty exciting. So whoever's listening, who's going to invent that shit for us, get started.
Well, and then think how cool it would be. They got these like simulation of control rooms now, for headphones and stuff like that. Like when it's a whole simulation of like, what studio do you want to be in? Okay, you're in it. Now do what you would do if you were there. You're just not. I can go like move a fader, twist the knob, and walk around the console, and technically it's not there, but I couldn't tell the difference. Awesome.
Yeah, I've had some other, I'll share some of my other ideas. Another one was, wouldn't it be cool if you don't even need to wear goggles, but or maybe you do, but the little scanner thing just sees that you have an old mixer in front of you that's maybe off, but it pre-maps all the knobs and the faders to control the computer. And so now we can like outfit our whole studio with knobs and racks and old mixers and all kinds of cool shit. And it would all just like control Pro Tools. And I should ask you that. Are you mixing inside Pro Tools? Is that the DAW you use?
My main DAW is Pro Tools for sure. Yeah, I'm a Pro Tools guy, but my old business partner who I built the studio with is a composer and a producer. His name is Graham O'Brien, and he was amazing. He went to Ableton pretty quickly, and so I had to get deep verse into Ableton, specifically for mixing. I wasn't doing a lot of recording and production, but his productions would come in, and he was doing a lot of mixing along the way. So when I would get the thing, I would have to understand what the hell was going on Ableton. Ableton is amazing.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Sounds amazing too.
Yeah, so one of the first things I noticed about Ableton when I started dabbling with it so many years ago was you can just kind of push the fader levels all the way up until you're in the red on the stereo bus, and somehow it still sounded great.
Yeah, man. I don't know what's going on with their mix engine, but it's cool. I don't like their interface with the little arrow for a fader, but whatever. I had a lot of problems getting the fader port, as we were talking about before, to connect so I could do my automation on there, but whatever. I got over it because it was just cool, man. Yeah, the nature of how the mix bus sounds is awesome. The way that they're kind of sidechain in the glue compressor. They have a glue compressor, which is basically trying to emulate an SSL compressor. They make it look similar to it even. And its settings are all the SSL kind of standard settings as far as the threshold and the ratio and makeup gain and what have you. But there's if you go into that side chain, if you're specifically looking to do the pump thing, which, if you're into EDM and you're programming maybe electronic music, there's a lot of that going on. So it makes sense that it's kind of just built into that stereo bus compressor, but it does it better than anything I've been able to find. Just the stock Ableton glue compressor is what it's called.
Yeah.
So you can take your kick drum or whatever and side chain it in on a send to that compressor. So your kick drum can push your compressor or whatever. It does that kind of pump thing so musically, so cool, and it punches. It's awesome. So I can't speak enough about that part of it. And in hip hop stuff, which is what I was that composer was doing a lot of hip hop stuff. It was great to be able to lean on that whenever I wanted to. I still was able to use all of my UAD plugs, still able to use all of my like standard AAX stuff. Only it's all VSTs. Which also opens up the crazy, wacky world of the VST kind of open source community that exists in the internet of just people making weird plugs and just posting them up for you to mess with. There is so much weird stuff out there, and they look horrible. The interfaces are usually kind of shitty, but they are weird. And I mean, after you've done enough, music, like mixing, recording, what have you, you're going to know what EQs you like. You're going to know what compressors you like. You're going to know what effects you like. So after a while, you're like, how do I shake this up? You're going to go through that, I would assume, constantly, like always just getting bored. And in the Ableton world, or, in the world that can use VSTs, there's so much just stuff that people post out on the internet. Now, it might be buggy. It might not be the best thing to put on your system, but there's weird shit. If you're into it, you can find some really, and it's unique, and it's just different colors. We're just looking for different colors after a while, and that's like that about Ableton too, is that, I would look and see what Graham was using, and I'm like, what the hell is this? None of this is in English. Like things I was like, this is the most, but it's doing something weird. It's a weird distortion, or it's a weird phaser, or it's a weird delay. And so that was really inspiring to be in Ableton and have access to that type of software.
So I've got your Spotify playlist up. Is there an artist or a record you want to give a shout out to? Something that you're excited about having mixed in Ableton Live?
Well, that Sadistik record, Alters, which is on that playlist, was done all in Ableton. And yeah, I think that record's super kick-ass. So that would be a good example of an Ableton album. And
that's kind of, I remember, I think one of my notes about that, one of my questions about that was, because that's kind of, it's almost like a, well, I guess with one of the notes, well, which one? Yeah, Perseus remix, Sadistik Slug Christ was, wasn't there some really great kind of freaky, distorted and 3D wide effects and stuff like that on there?
Yeah. So, I've done a bunch of records with Sadistik now. And I'm actually in the process of doing one as we speak. I had it queued up before this interview. One of my favorite things about, so that particular record, that was a record that Graham had kind of executive produced, in that there was a bunch of different producers that made beats that Cody, that's Sadistik, that's his name, his real name is Cody, the Sadistik had picked out, and then everything went to Graham, and then Graham would decide on what he was going to do. He would alter the beats, he would add stuff, he would change stuff, and then like basically produce it from there. So it was like there were beat makers, and then there was like an actual producer for the project, and Graham was the actual producer, but he was modifying those beats heavily. And Graham was doing that all in Ableton, and when the fun thing about that is that we were co-mixing a lot of that, and Graham would do, mostly we'd be worried about the beats. And like, him and Cody would talk about the vocals and what he wanted him to do in certain sections, layer it, stack it, approach it this way, what have you. And then once it was done and Graham was like, yeah, the vocals are cool, the vocals were 100% on me. As far as like the mixing duality that Graham and I had, is he would focus more on drums and like the music. And then I was 100% left alone with vocals, and I could do anything to the music as well. The drums, he was more like, the drums are my thing, but everything else is up for grabs, and then he's not touching vocals.
So you were finally allowed to sing harmony in the control room.
I was finally allowed to put so many harmonies. No, So the fun thing about Cody is that Cody is like a scary guy. He's like a scary rapper. Like his music is all built on horrifying things. It's like if he was going to do a thriller movie, he's doing it in the music world. And so, I get to do tons of weird shit that I just don't get to do on a lot of records. You give me a folk record, I can't do half that shit. So it's distortions, it's pitches, it's weird bending sounds and bending delays. Nothing slick. Everything has to be dirty and kind of some sort of distortion or saturation. So on that particular thing that you're referencing, he had just kind of classic doubles where he's just doubling certain words in the middle of his rap. And what I had done is I had used Sound Toys' little Ultra Boy.
Yeah.
And pitched those things down. And then you mess with the format tool to kind of get it sitting right. You kind of have to just do that while it's in the mix to hear where it's sitting right, because it's somewhat pitch related. It's also just how it sits.
Let me just put in a note. So Rockstar's formant is the part. It's the adjustment that makes it sound like a man's voice or like a lady's voice.
Right. Exactly,
without changing the pitch itself.
Exactly right. And it also changes the texture. Like in my eyes, once you get the pitch right, so it's not rubbing. You're now just kind of manipulating the texture of the tone. And so with that one, I was taking those and I was like, I need these things to be scarier, because we've like, the thing with Cody is that when he kind of gives you very straight ahead stuff and then wants you to do something with it. And that's very common, I would say, in modern production now, is that they're like, I gave you stuff, you make it cool in the mix.
Right.
And that's not exactly the way it should be, or necessarily always the best way to go, but so be it. That's the way it goes with Cody, and so that's what I'm used to. So I'm like, all right, I got to do something with this. This is just straight up a double. Couldn't be more traditional.
So you must compartmentalize you must be like, okay, I'm in weirdness mode now. I'm not in like tweaking the mix bus mode.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I like, by the time I'm doing things like this, the track's already slamming, at this part. I'm looking to just now, like, where's the color? Where's the reason why this track is cool? Where are the moves? Like I wouldn't necessarily do this in automation, which would be the last step. Mm-hmm. But I might do some programming right away if there are like moves, just to kind of get the part in there. At that point, I'm kind of changing the part, and then I'll finalize it later,
But interesting that you described it as get the mix slamming, then make these changes, as opposed to the other way. And a band record where you're like adding parts and creating sounds, but it's always sort of this crappy rough mix until you finally get it to the mix stage.
Yeah, exactly right. You get different projects at different parts, give you different things that you can do with them.
Yeah.
And in this case, the beats would be already slamming because Graham had them banging. And so it would just get these vocals in there and make them cool, and then we would just kind of polish it up from there. In that case, I was dropping the pitch. I was distorting them, probably with Decapitator, although I really love the Waves Kramer tape. I use that a ton.
Nice. For distortion.
I use it not so much for distortion. I definitely use it for distortion sometimes, but more often than not, I use it to just de-harsh or de-digitize. Like the UAD Oxide, I think is what it is. Mm-hmm. I think is my current favorite. And these are constantly changing, but is my current favorite like de-digitizer. Like I'm going to put this on there and I'm going to do nothing probably to it. And now it feels a little more musical than it did before.
Yeah.
Kramer, I put on when I'm like, this is a tambourine and it's hurting my ears. It's too harsh.
Right.
I need to get some of that jangly, harsh stuff, that really digital and highly transient thing mellowed out. That's when I'll go to Kramer and I'll just, the default is that the input and the output are linked. I'll just turn that input until the sound is like darker and warmer. And then I will unlink it and turn up the output so that I get some of my level back.
Yeah, cool.
And then there's another knob, I think it's flux, just to the right of the output. I forget what it is,
the
but
flux
you turn
capacitor, right? Isn't that
it's the
how
flux capacitor, and with trash, you can do so much with that.
Oh my God, trash is
amazing.
That's actually you're mixing so many joke metaphors here. I'm going to get lost here, but a little shout out to Back to the Future Rockstars.
Yeah.
But the trash plugin by Isotope is pretty amazing. You can do a ton of stuff. I don't know if you mess with that one much for distortion.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah, that one is cool because it's got subtleties and some really bold stuff.
Yeah.
And the other one that I'm getting into is the Fab Filter Saturn. That thing is so hi-fi and so flexible and malleable. That like for some of the things where I want to do maybe like an Americana record and I want to go for like a T-Bone Burnett type production where I needed to have some pretty fat, warm thing. Well, when you're talking about fat and warm, you're talking about low-end growl to me. Things that are harmonically growling, but they don't sound like distortion. This isn't your Boss Metal Zone pedal. This is your 2-inch tape machine. This is tubes. This is stuff like that that are just adding warmth and fatness. And I find that the Fab Filter Saturn is doing that in a really hi-fi way, where the Kramer, the Waves Kramer tape plugin will do it in a little more of a lo-fi way.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could go on for days. I mean, the Decapitator is going to be a little more on the lo-fi spectrum, but you have all those style buttons. Each one of those is a dramatically different type of distortion. And trying to figure out where to set that tone knob is going to completely change that distortion too. But I would also say, compared to that Fab Filter Saturn plug, the Decapitator is way more lo-fi compared to that Saturn plug. So it kind of depends. And then you can get into like the UAD Studer. That's super hi-fi. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so like that one, maybe I need to like sound more expensive. So I'll put that thing on something, you know what I mean? And just add money to it. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Well, it's cool hearing you talk about it too, because I have had a tendency to think about the tape options like which one is the better sounding kind of pure run the whole mix through a tape. And I have had some luck running a whole mix through a tape plugin, but that's not always what it's always about. So sometimes it's just about like getting the sound, the source sound to sound right to begin with. Like you said, with the tambourine. And the Waves J37 is another one I use a bunch too. Which has been really helpful. Although I think I've gotten burned on that a few times by not turning down the wow and flutter settings that are default. And like later I listen to a record and I'm like, is that saxophone going like, whoa, 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 whoa? And I just didn't notice it.
That's a great one. I love that one. That one's got some really killer delays in it too.
And then how about Gullfoss? Have you had a chance to try that one too?
I haven't. Tell me more.
It is Sound Theory, I believe is the company, and I just got it, so I'm just taking a look at it myself. But it breaks up your audio into like 300 bands or something, and it uses AI to instantly, EQ your music, or maybe it's like 300 times a second or something like that. But it's adjusting the frequency. So if you have anything that's harsh, it actually is trying to tone that and balance it for you in real time.
Is this the Soothe plug?
It's like Soothe. It's like that. Yeah. Which I also don't have, but it's, or I haven't used Soothe yet, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And I love learning about all these different options, and, each one seems to have a different use case. I think Gullfoss is, a great use case for that is, when you want to just put that like finishing smooth out on something, as opposed to doing an extreme difference.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. That sounds like a good like stereo bus, save my ass type of plug.
Yeah, it could be. I'm on the fence about that because part of me is also like, do I want my stereo bus to be like an ever changing thing, or do I want to, because it is EQing it as it goes.
Yeah, that does sound scary now, especially as things like, your low end is shifting around and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah, I got into that Soothe plug, which it sounds like it's like, and I originally got into it because I wanted another de-esser. I find de-essers are constantly like a problem.
Right.
Finding the
They're
right
never
de-esser.
enough. I think it's possible that it's because we compress the shit out of everything these days.
I think you're 100%. I think there's a lot of spitting happening after these things overshoot. And there's a lot of things going into it. The right mic choice, the right, distance and that the vocalist might be on. But I've definitely been constantly on the hunt for finding the best one, and I found that there are ones that are good in certain scenarios and ones that are good in other scenarios. And I was looking at Soothe as a de-esser, and I found it to show up in other places. Like I'm using it on my vocals more now than I probably should, and it's doing more than de-essing. So.
Yeah.
I'm putzing around with it, trying to get a grip of it. I have a feeling it's a plug that I'm going to walk away from one day because I'm leaning on it too much. But right now I'm having fun.
Yeah. I had a really hilarious kind of stupid moment with vocals not too long ago where the artist was singing on the mic and it sounded great one way and then it sounded too essy. And I realized it was because it sounded better when he sang with his mask on.
Oh, wow. That's actually a really interesting post-COVID benefit.
I don't know.
Is to be like, this is something we learned during COVID. Keep your mask on.
Oh my God.
It's going to be great.
Please no. Please no.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, that was just sort of a funny aside. But it does remind us, though, it's like you said about wrapping the iPhone in a towel before recording it. We have all these really sort of basic physical things we can do to sound that we sometimes just forget about. It's like there's a trick where, I think it was Steve Marcantonio on the podcast talked about putting your fingers up in front of your mouth or two pencils and it causes the wind. It was either a P-pop or I think it was a de-esser on the mic. It'll take a little bit of the S off of the vocal going right into the mic.
Very cool. My original mentor, Tuck, taught me about the pencil thing too. I think he was going for plosives, but I would be curious to know if it changed S's too.
Well, certainly like pivoting slightly on the mic can make a difference. And, I think about like us as engineers and producers, we get so used to critically listening that we notice all these finer details in a pair of headphones immediately. But, sometimes artists, they're not used to that. They're not hearing the difference at all, It might take them a while to learn how to hear the difference. But if you can, you can just adjust how you're on the mic and it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it is always fun when you work with an artist who also is an engineer on their own right or a producer in their own right who records and does stuff like that, because they'll completely work the mic and do things like that because they know how this thing works.
And they've learned to trust their own ears.
Yeah. And I think that's, occasionally you get someone, speaking of podcasts, like a podcast is another good example where they're like, can we just do this off no headphones? And you're like, no, it's very important that you're on headphones because you need to hear what you sound like so that you work the mic naturally. If you're not on headphones, you're
funny enough, I do the opposite, dude.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, when I was doing in-person interviews, I learned early on that they were better if we didn't have headphones on.
Interesting. Was it because they were more relaxed?
Because everybody was relaxed. It was like a real conversation. It was just like everybody just lightened up. It was a little hard because sometimes I'm watching them like fall off the mic or they would like go off to the side of the mic so they could make better eye contact with me. And I'm like, oh man. And then I'm like trying to shift to the left so they go back to the left. Or
totally. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was coming from because I've done a little bit of podcast recording and definitely some kind of weirder voiceover stuff. And I was like, no, I want you on headphones so that you don't get off mic. It'll remind you to stay on mic. But I completely understand the perspective you're coming from, which is I want everyone to be relaxed and comfortable more than anything.
Yeah, it changes the way, if you hear your own voice, it can change the way you're speaking. Or, if the voice is hot in the headphones, it can cause you to talk in more of a quiet, all of a sudden we're all on NPR now or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Today the president did something that we're all upset about.
There you go.
Again, every day, every president, we're all upset about it.
Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. We are coming to the end of the podcast, but I thought I'd hit you with some of our closeout questions, some of the jam session questions.
Cool.
If you're ready. So these ones, you can kind of give us a quick take on it. I'll start at the second one here. Some of the best advice you remember receiving in the studio.
This is one that I'm reminded of a lot. And it is the song will tell you what to do. You know what I mean? So especially when I'm mixing, I might go into a mix, listen to a rough mix and feel like I know what I want to do with the track. And so I'll go in there and I'll start pulling up stuff and, getting it right where I think it should be. I got this other song that it reminds me of, and I think that song would fit this type of whatever. And it's just not clicking. It's because I'm trying to manhandle whatever production has been given to me into something else. This song will tell you what to do. And that was one of the bigger little quotes and lessons that sticks with me, is like, just follow what the song is doing. There are certain things that even if the song was performed differently might work, but it's not working with the way this particular performance was or the way it was captured. You might not be able to do anything you want. And more often than not, you shouldn't. Just do what the song is telling you to do, especially with things that are a little more honest, like a folk song or an Americana song or a full band that's all people performing acoustic instruments. You're going to be very much dictated as to the way it was captured and the way they played it. You get into more programmed material, you might have a little more flexibility, but more often than not, you're still going to, mix yourself into knots if you're not paying attention to what the song wants to do. There's certain things that the song is only going to let you get away with, and so follow that. And so oftentimes, this is, I think, why the longer people mix records, the more they all kind of land on the same thing, which is the less I do, the better it gets.
I love it, man. The song will tell you what to do. That was one of the long lost Led Zeppelin records that never was released, I think.
Should have been.
All right. How about quickly, we can go through the rest of these pretty quick, but recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that the rock stars could use today on their next session in the studio.
Let's see. Maybe, take DIs more on guitars, even acoustic guitars. If you're going to do acoustic guitar vocal, which is one of the more challenging things to record well, go ahead and take a DI off that acoustic guitar if you have that option. If you have too much vocal in your acoustic guitar and you try to turn that guitar up and you can't because it's changing your vocal sound too much, if you have gotten a DI off that, you can do a lot of fixing that guitar where it sits in the mix with a DI. Granted, it can take a lot of EQ, but it can save your ass. Obviously, with electric guitars, you could reamp it if you have some sort of problem or a tone that you're fighting. So I would say that, DIs get a bad name and they always pretty much sound horrible, but just get them sort of like hi-hat mics. You may not use it, but get them because you're going to want it when you need it.
Now, do we need to learn anything about phase aligning the DI to the guitar mic in the same way we might with a bass and a bass amp?
Absolutely. You got to listen. And phase is where you start when you start setting up your sounds. And the more you EQ and compress, you might need to check your phase again. So yes, absolutely pay attention to your phase. Don't just assume when you turn it up, it's going to be better. You might have to mess with it.
Do you ever actually time align the DI to the microphone, or is it more just a polarity phase?
I'll just blow up the waveforms and lock the phase in a very visual way.
Right, just scoot one or the other until it looks good.
Just move the waveforms and so that the positives are with the positives and the negatives with the negatives. They're both complex waveforms, so they're not going to just be perfect mirror images. So get your initial, find a strong transient that you think is feeling good, lock it to that and see if it feels good. It's not necessarily going to always be perfect.
I think you just described 2022. The positives got with the positives and the negatives got with the negatives. Okay. How about a favorite hardware tool in the studio? Something that you love to have around on sessions?
Man, favorite hardware tool. That fader port in mixing for sure is a favorite hardware tool. In a tracking scenario, probably my Coles 3048.
Nice, man. You like to blow right into it?
Yeah, I like to just get really close. And first of all, I take two of them and let them totally slam into each other. Then I'll blow into them.
There you go. And then pour water on them.
Yeah, and at that point, just burn my money and then be happy.
Right. Just throw your new computer out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite software tool or something you're excited about recently?
That Chandler Germanium plug that I caught Michael Brower throwing that on a mix, and what it did to the lower octave on his stereo bus is where he was using it. And
who makes that one?
Chandler makes, I think Softtube is the one who did the emulation. The Chandler Germanium, it's a compressor, but it's got other stuff going on, and it's got a drive knob. But frankly, I've not really messed with the plug very much. I just go to his preset and put it on the stereo bus, and I now have access to a new lower octave that I did not have before. That's a big deal when you're in the box trying to find some of this stuff that can give you some of this, width and dimension and especially with Pro Tools. Pro Tools is so sterile that you need things to give you some of these colors and access to some of these frequencies. That plug, as soon as I heard him turn it on, he was doing a mix with his hardware unit in a video. And I was like, holy shit, that's how he gets his lower octave. That was massive when he put it in there. And so for my hip hop stuff, for my R&B stuff, for anything where I want to have that low octave really have some meat to it, some heavy presence, that has been a game changer. Now, other stuff, maybe some rock records, maybe some more Americana stuff, I might not be able to use that plugin at all. It totally will ruin a mix. In fact, I'll probably have, some sort of EQ high passing. I don't even want that extended low end on some of those different things. But for the stuff where I do want it, I found that plug has been blowing my mind. So that's my new current favorite software thing.
That's cool. And I wonder, I don't know if anybody's made the Chandler TG1 yet as a plugin, but I can't wait for that to come around because that was an amazing limiter.
It's so cool. There are some cool things that they're starting to figure out how to make digital, which is, good news for us in the box.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll make a podcast digital. Oh, wait a minute. They already are. All right. So let's ask this.
Getting long.
Yeah. We'll ask this last question. And Rockstars, in case you're wondering, no, I do not take our voices and run them through tape emulators for 2 hours. This is a theoretical, hypothetical. That's the word I'm looking for. Hypothetical question. Don't get hypothermia. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. Actually, you might. You're still up in Minneapolis, and you're probably taking the Skyway to go back home after this.
Wow, good for you for knowing about the Skyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, man. I'm a Replacements fan.
Oh, dude, yeah.
So you're going to go back in time, and you're going to find young Adam Krinsky with the coolest last name that reminds me of Christmas sometimes. And you
Oh,
say,
thanks.
hey, dude, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I would say, just be patient and keep showing up. You're not supposed to have all the tools right away. You're not supposed to understand how it all works right away. You're not necessarily even supposed to be terribly good right away. And that's a good thing in life. You will appreciate things later more because of it. But keep showing up. You know what I mean? Like, keep finding records to work on and keep taking the best swing you can at it, and don't get too down. Um, uh, you know, I never really went through a period of time where I thought I was going to quit or that I was so upset and frustrated, but I definitely was like, wanting to be better than I was. You know what I mean? As fast as I was like, why is it not? How are they doing it? Why is it? And it's like, because you
Why
don't
is there
know
not
yet.
a podcast yet?
Why is there not? Why hasn't Lidge reached out? Why? And it's fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. If I knew then that I would still be doing it, after many of my friends who I went to school with and friends that I met after the fact, who aren't doing it, if I knew that, I would be able to look at myself and be like, "Hey, man, just you're going to be fine. Just stick this out." But really, what it was like I just thought I should be good at that point after 4 or 5 years in, and if I wasn't, I probably wasn't cut out for it. And it's just not the case. It takes a long time to get this stuff figured out. It takes a long time to get your voice, find your voice. It takes a long time for you to build clientele and a reputation. And that's a patience thing. That's a trust thing. That's a believing in yourself thing. And those are serious challenges for most people. Definitely for myself along the way of being able to like keep showing up. But that would be my suggestion, is like, you're doing fine. You're not supposed to know how it works right away. Just keep showing up, keep finding gigs, keep paying attention, keep trying. If you work hard enough over enough period of time, you will figure it out. And at that point, it's just a matter of if that's reasonable to you. Is that going to work for the rest of the goals you have in your life? For me, it was, and I got lucky. And I think that's a big part of it too. Is even if you're working hard, nothing's guaranteed. So, just keep showing up, because you never know where the next gig is going to come from. You never know if it's going to come from something that had nothing to do with what you wanted to do. So that would be my suggestion to myself. Just
That's cool.
Be patient. Be patient.
I was just going to pick up on something you said, like luck comes around. So if you're there still, then you might be present when the luck comes around and you get your shot, whatever it is. I'm guessing for you, one of the things that was lucky was just getting that front of house gig and having a new perspective. One of the many things for you.
Yeah, I've had so many magical, lucky moments. I would say the Trampled gig, I mean, it's absolutely a dream gig for a front of house person. So I'm very lucky to have it, but I didn't necessarily feel lucky when I got it, because that had been a conversation that had been brewing, and I was close to that band for a while prior to it. So it felt kind of natural. I would say, getting to appreciate the difference and being able to go back into the studio, that was lucky. To be able to go and do like Red Rocks and then come home and be in my studio and still have clients that wanted me to mix records, and being able to hear the records still and be able to mix completely differently and be successful at it. That was lucky that they gave me that chance, both bands on both sides of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the biggest luck was, when I came to school, I got inspired by the city and by other people. When I graduated, I got hired by the guy who was the top dog as his assistant. Those were huge moments that changed the entire trajectory of my life. That first record I did with this band called the Alarmists did really well locally. And like I said, I've never not had bands wanting to mix records. I've always had 2 or 3 or, a bunch of records coming at me at once. Since that was super lucky. If those things wouldn't have happened, I would definitely not be still in Minneapolis. I would definitely not have worked on the records that I got to work on. Maybe I would have done cooler stuff, right? Who knows? Maybe I would have gone to Los Angeles and I would have been working with Drake, who knows?
Maybe you'd be raising more puppies right now.
Maybe I'd be raising puppies in, St. Louis, Missouri. Who knows?
Dude, thanks so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's been a super blast hanging out with you. You are a killer storyteller and a great, great, great guest on the show. Please let the Rockstars know how they can find you online. Where would you like them to go? What if they're ready to either produce or mix their next hit record, or they just need a great front of house engineer or somebody to come teach them?
That's awesome. You can hit me up at my email, Adam Krinsky, KRINSKY @gmail.com. I got lucky and got all the versions of Adam Krinsky everything. So I'm adamkrinsky.com, Adam Krinsky on Twitter, Adam Krinsky on Facebook, all of them. You can find me on any one of those things.
Did you get adamkrinskykchristmas.com?
I didn't, but
it's not too late.
Now that you've inspired me, granted it's February. I guess this is March today. Shit. Yeah, I guess we're recording this in March.
We gave it away, but it come out.
We gave it away.
Later,
you can cut that out. But right now, Christmas is not on the mind.
Nice, dude. Well, thank you again so much for hanging with us. Super pleasure. I look forward to coming up and meeting you in person or seeing your studio and space up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Is it in St. Paul or is it in Minneapolis, or does that not even matter? That does matter, right?
It's technically in downtown St. Paul.
Okay.
And Minneapolis is a 15-minute drive, so they're kind of the same place.
Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much. And be well. Make rock and roll.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
All right, man. Thanks for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free trial subscription to get access to all their plugins. Or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.